Admiral Mark Montgomery, retired United States Navy, is senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and he's an expert on what we are sending and not sending to Ukraine. So, Admiral, welcome. I want to dive right into that. What did you make of the decision by the president to free up money for Ukraine, and what more ought he or the Congress to do?
Thanks. So, look, I'm happy in general. Now, I don't think he freed up money. He freed up access, and he made it really clear It's going to be European money. And I like that he freed up access. You know, there was a time, particularly post the Zelensky meeting in the White House, where I questioned whether the president would allow access to our defense industrial base for Ukraine as the Biden era Presidential Drawdown Authority and Ukrainian Security Assistance Initiative weapons, finish delivering over some of those over the next few months. Actually, some of them may take a year or two, but there would be a lack of access. That would have been very detrimental to Ukraine, because Ukraine, through dint of all the 3 years of giving, is really dependent on U.S. weapon systems, Patriot launchers, NASAMS, another air defense launcher, our Bradleys, our M113 personnel carriers, our 155 artillery. They really, they have our gear. They have our gear. They have to be able to access our defense industrial base. And what the president said there clearly was, I'm allowing you access to our defense industrial base, particularly for defensive munitions. So that's a win. And the Europeans had better step up and buy that stuff, and whether I'm not sure how it's delivered. There's two mechanisms, and there's a little bit of word salad between him and Secretary Rutte, to steal a term from the election. I'm not sure if the weapons are U.S. weapons that are pulled out and then Europe pays for us to get new ones, or they're European weapons that are delivered and then Europe buys replacements from us. But in any of the case, it's our defense industrial base, our workforce, generating money in America for these purchases.
Now, Admiral, what do you understand to be the state of the war along the front line? Is it static, or is Russia grinding forward like the 1918 German offensive before they run out of gas?
So, yes. I think yes to both, in the sense that it's broadly static at a macro level, but at a micro level, they're grinding forward in a few areas, and they're going to gain a square mile here, a square mile there. I don't believe they're creating a salient for a significant gain. I don't believe they'll get a significant city to fall, but they will do this. And, I've said this to you before, my experience there in Ukraine tells me they're not going to lose. They're not going to win. They're not going to expel Russia without a dramatic event happening, expel Russia from Eastern Ukraine or from Crimea, but they're not going to lose. The question is, how much critical infrastructure, how many Ukrainian civilians are killed en route to not losing, en route to
Admiral,
an eventual inevitable ceasefire?
I see these horrific attacks every night at 300, 400, 500 drones and cruise missiles and things like that. Why do you suspect the president will not allow offensive weapons to be sold? Because the only way to get Russia to stop that is actually to hit Russia.
So I do think eventually we will sell. Right now, my guess is that Ukraine has less than 20 ATACMS weapons left. Those are our long-range, 300, kilometer, 200-mile strike weapons. I think we'll end up delivering more of those to them. Maybe the Europeans will pay us to replace them. We won't even replace them with ATACMS. We've moved on from ATACMS to a system called PrSM, Precision Strike Missile, which is a more advanced ATACMS, or some naval missiles that have been converted into Army missiles. Doesn't matter. We're not buying these older ATACMS. So I think eventually he will allow the delivery of them with money coming from either Ukraine or from the Europeans to reimburse our stockpile so that we can buy something new. And that's going to be to me, Hugh, that is the kind of weapon that does start moving Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table. Defensive weapons
I agree.
Won't do.
I agree. Now I want to switch 180 degrees on you to the Middle East and the Pacific. You served in the Pacific a lot. Yesterday, Ron Dermer, Strategic Affairs Minister to Benjamin Netanyahu, did a podcast with our friend Dan Senor, in which he said the strike on Iran, Americans should realize, allows you to do the pivot. In other words, it has so destabilized Iran and weakened Iran that Israel and the Gulf Arab states can become hegemons jointly, keep Iran in a bottle, and allow America to pivot to the Pacific finally. What do you make of that assessment?
So I agree with most of it, and have one qualification. First, I would say it's true, but it isn't the 12 days of strikes by Israel and the 12 hours of strikes by the United States. It's the what Israel has done since October 8th. Not necessarily Gaza, although Gaza, they have removed a large part of Hamas. It's what they've done with Hezbollah, with the IRGC in Syria and Iraq, and the Syrian air defense forces. They did a masterful 4-day campaign after Assad fled to destroy the Syrian Air Force and Syrian air defense forces in a way that Syrian airspace is now Israeli airspace. You know, during the 12-day war, the Syrian president said, you could use my airspace. I mean, not sure the choice, right? So it's that whole campaign. Look, the Israelis got beaten bad on October 7th. I would say as a military planning, strategic planning force over the last 18 months, they have hit home run after home run against Hezbollah, against Syria, against the IRGC. I mean, the only thing they haven't wiped out is the same thing we couldn't wipe out. That was the Houthis in Yemen, and they did a better job, I think, than we did on them. But then he's right. We weakened Iran. Look, this is the opportunity to these kind of like extended multi-carrier strike group, 5 or 6 Air Force extra squadrons in Al Udeid and Qatar. I think we can start to pull back from that. We can concentrate our forces. So what that will do is allow us to restore our military readiness so that we're ready for the fight in the Pacific. We're not ready for the fight in the Pacific when we have extra carrier strike groups on station, extra submarines on station, and extra Air Force squadrons. And the Air Force particularly, and the Navy, are the barometers you have to watch for readiness. And are we ready to fight in the Pacific?
So, Admiral, are we going to do somewhere in the Pacific, whether it's Australia or the Philippines or Japan, expansions to parallel the sort of base structure that we have built up over decades in the Middle East, both in Bahrain and Qatar, in the UAE? I think we might even have some in Saudi. We've got some in Kuwait, some in Iraq. Are we going to do that in the Far East? Is that what's on the table?
So in fairness, we already have a healthy force structure there that has kind of stayed fairly static over 40 years. In other words, since the end of the Vietnam War, we have naval bases in 2 in Japan, 1 in Guam that are fairly large. I mean, among our largest naval bases. We have airfields spread throughout. We have 4 significant airfields in Japan, 2 in Korea, 1 in Guam, and then an alternative in Australia. I think what you're going to see us do is build distributed air power throughout the Philippines, throughout the Marianas, throughout Japan, not on military bases, so that we become a harder targeting problem for China. If we spread our forces throughout Japan and strike, and fight a war in Taiwan from Japan, that's a tough, we're giving a strategic dilemma to China. Are they going to strike all of Japan? That will bring Japan into the war aggressively on the U.S. side. So from my point of view, that's what we'll do. We'll distribute our forces in the Philippines, in a little bit in Australia, and in Japan, and in the Marianas. That's Guam, Tinian.
Will that be provocative, Admiral? Do the Chinese look at that and say, oh, we'd better go now before they distribute all their bases across the Thousand Islands of the Philippines and goodness knows where else? When we do that, do we provoke early assault on Taiwan?
For a minute, I thought you'd gone crazy on me, and you're asking me, should we not provoke China? And of course, I'm from this. If I'm willing, a war with China over Taiwan would cost us 7,000 to 25,000 troops. If we're willing to do that, and we say we are, then we've got to be willing to provoke China, to piss them off with some of our maneuvers, because to be ready for this war, to deter the war, even prevent it from happening, you have to make these posture movements. And that's what you're talking about, expanding our forward posture in the Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia. Yes, we have to do it. I do not think it will provoke them into war. It will provoke them into Khrushchev-like shoe on the podium screaming at the UN. But, I think our answer to that is we have the right to create a deterrent effect for ourselves and our allies and partners. And we have the right to create a positive warfighting situation. We don't complain about their movements within China. We don't complain about their building programs that is clearly targeted the U.S. Navy and U.S. Air Force. they need to understand we're going to protect our forces, and we're going to do what we said we'd do in the Taiwan Relations Act and make sure Taiwan only joins China at their own decision.